There are days you believe will be the happiest of your life, until a Karen shows up and ruins it with a single 911 call. Morgan had just completed 8 years of military service. Coming home after 2 years apart, her smile bright enough to light up the entire neighborhood. Her husband, Ryan, had spent days scrubbing every inch of their home, hanging a "Welcome Home" banner across the porch, placing fresh flowers on the table, the smell of freshly baked bread filling the kitchen. He checked his watch repeatedly, jittery like a teenager waiting for his first date, listening for the sound of that military vehicle turning onto Pinewood Drive. When the olive green truck finally pulled up, Morgan stepped out with the confident bearing of someone who had commanded troops overseas. Tall, athletic, her eyes scanned the surroundings out of habit, the reflexes of a soldier who had seen combat. Ryan rushed out to greet her, wrapping her in a hug that seemed to dissolve every worry in the world. But that moment of peace lasted only a few breaths. The front door of house 1247 slammed open, and Karen emerged in a pink bathrobe, phone in hand like a weapon, eyes scanning from the military license plates to Morgan, dissecting her like a suspicious package. "This is a quiet, family neighborhood, not a military base," Karen announced loudly enough for every neighbor to hear, snapping photos of the truck from every angle, a look of smug satisfaction spreading across her face. Before Morgan and Ryan could say a word, Karen dialed 911 right there in their front yard. "I need to report a suspicious military vehicle, possible stolen valor, parked on Pinewood Drive," Karen declared into the phone, watching Morgan with that toxic satisfaction only a self-appointed neighborhood enforcer could possess. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some stepping out onto their porches, the quiet afternoon charged with tension like a thunderstorm rolling in. Ryan gripped Morgan's hand, worry clouding his face, but Morgan simply nodded, her eyes calm and steady, ready for the confrontation. What Karen didn't know was that her call would set off a chain of events that would end the HOA empire she had ruled for 12 years. Within an hour, the quiet hum of Pinewood Drive was shattered by the soft wail of sirens as 2 police cars turned the corner, lights flashing but sirens off. Officer Martinez, a seasoned cop with weathered lines of patience on his face, stepped out first. Behind him was Officer Thompson, young and eager, eyes scanning the scene with the sharpness of someone still trying to prove himself. Karen was ready, standing at the edge of the driveway with the confidence of a dictator about to deliver judgment. She pointed dramatically at Morgan's truck, her voice loud enough to draw even more neighbors from their windows. "Officers, thank God you're here," Karen began, placing her hand dramatically on her chest like a performer. "This vehicle is in violation of our HOA rules, and this woman claims to be military. But we have no record of her here. She could be a danger to our children, our families, our property values." Her words cut through the morning air like barbed wire, her eyes glinting with the thrill of imagined power. She glanced back, expecting nods of approval from the gathering crowd, convinced she was protecting her kingdom. Officer Martinez approached calmly. "Mom, we'll handle this," he said, signaling Karen to step aside. Then he turned to Morgan, his posture polite but cautious. "Mom, we need to see identification to clear up the situation." Karen smirked, crossing her arms with smug satisfaction, her eyes dancing with victory as she prepared for the humiliation she was sure would follow. Neighbors whispered, some looking away, uncomfortable with the spectacle but too curious to leave. Morgan moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into her back pocket with calm precision, the same precision she had used to command troops overseas. She pulled out her wallet, the leather creaking in the silence, flipping it open to reveal her military ID, its silver eagle catching the light. Colonel Morgan Swift, United States Army. The world seemed to pause. Karen's smirk faltered, her jaw dropping as her eyes locked onto the ID, trying to process the reality of what she was seeing. The same neighbors who had been whispering a moment before were now silent, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Officer Martinez's eyes widened, his posture straightening instantly, snapping to a crisp salute with the respect of a man who recognized true authority. "Colonel Swift," he said, his voice now carrying deep respect, "My apologies, ma'am." Even Officer Thompson, who had been shifting nervously, straightened and saluted, his face flushed with embarrassment for having doubted her. Karen's face drained of color, her authority crumbling in front of the entire street. She stammered, trying to find words, her hands shaking, but nothing came out. Morgan nodded once, accepting the salute, her calm gaze sweeping across the neighbors, then resting on Karen. "Thank you, officers," Morgan said quietly, her voice steady as steel. "And thank you for your service. In that moment, everyone saw who truly commanded respect, and who had built her power on fear alone. For a heartbeat, Pinewood Drive was silent. The neighbors, the birds, even the breeze seemed to pause as they processed what had just happened. Karen, who had spent years terrorizing this street with her clipboard and threats, stood frozen, mouth open, eyes locked on the military ID in Morgan's hand. Her smirk was gone, replaced by confusion, disbelief, and finally fear. Morgan slipped her ID back into her pocket with calm precision, nodding at the officers who had just saluted her. It was a quiet moment of power, and the message was clear: this was not a woman to be intimidated. But Karen wasn't ready to let go of her illusion of control. This doesn't change the fact that you're violating HOA rules. Karen stammered, her voice rising in pitch, cracking as she tried to regain her footing. She turned to the neighbors, searching for support, but their faces were shifting. Where once there had been silent approval of her reign, now there was uncertainty, even discomfort. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. "Mom, there is no violation here that requires police intervention. We recommend you address any HOA concerns through proper channels, not 911. Karen's face flushed red, her eyes darting around as if realizing the audience she had drawn was no longer hers. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, clenching her fists at her sides. Morgan stepped forward, her gaze steady but not unkind, addressing the neighbors with calm authority. "We're here to build a peaceful home," she said, her voice carrying across the small crowd. "We respect this community, its rules, and the people who live here. But respect goes both ways." She didn't look at Karen, but the message was received. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, neighbors exchanging glances that said what they didn't dare say out loud. Finally, someone stood up to her. Karen's composure cracked further as her eyes flickered with something close to desperation. "You think you're above the rules because you're military," she snapped, but even she seemed to realize how weak it sounded. Morgan tilted her head, a calm smile touching her lips. "No, Karen, I follow rules. But I also know when someone is abusing them." The officers gave a final nod before walking back to their cars, leaving behind an atmosphere that felt like the first breath of fresh air Pinewood Drive had taken in years. Neighbors began to disperse, some nodding politely to Morgan, others offering small smiles of gratitude. Karen stood alone on the sidewalk, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, the silence around her deafening. As Morgan and Ryan stepped back into their home, Ryan exhaled, his shoulders finally dropping. "I can't believe she actually called the cops," he muttered, closing the door behind them. Morgan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "That's what bullies do, Ryan. They use fear when they feel their control slipping." From their window, they could see Karen pacing in front of her house, her phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp and frantic. It was clear she was already planning her next move, unwilling to accept that her authority had been publicly challenged. "Do you think she'll stop?" Ryan asked, concern clouding his face. Morgan shook her head, her eyes never leaving Karen. "People like her don't stop, they escalate." She turned away from the window, her mind already working. "But now we're prepared." That evening, while Ryan tried to relax, Morgan sat at the dining table, her laptop open, creating a new folder on her desktop. Operation Neighborhood Peace. Inside, she began documenting everything: Karen's calls, her pacing, the previous citations, the photos she'd taken of their house. Every interaction, every glare, every thinly veiled threat. "Karen wants to play games," Morgan said quietly, almost to herself. "She's about to find out what it feels like to be held accountable." Outside, the street was quiet, but the tension was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Karen, once the queen of Pinewood Drive, had been publicly challenged and her fragile authority was slipping. And for the first time, she was about to face an opponent she couldn't intimidate. Karen stood behind her window, her eyes no longer smug, but don't be fooled. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. 3 days after being humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, Pinewood Drive became eerily quiet. No more clip-clop of Karen's slippers during her OR patrols. No more muttering as she scouted for violations like a hawk circling prey. But from Morgan's window they could still see Karen's silhouette pacing behind the curtains, the glow of a laptop screen casting sharp shadows across her tense face. Karen was planning, searching for a way to reclaim her power. In her mind, only one sentence echoed: "No one humiliates Karen and walks away unscathed." On the morning of the fourth day, Morgan found 3 papers taped to their door, each boldly labeled notice of violation: noise disturbance at 5:45 a.m., parking violation, front tire extends 2 inches past the boundary, unauthorized display of signage welcome home banner. Ryan clenched his jaw as he read the absurd notices, while Morgan let out a quiet, knowing laugh. She's starting. The next day, 5 more violations appeared: excessive porch light brightness, disturbing neighbor rest, water runoff from garden hose crossing sidewalk line, trash bins placed outside before approved collection time, footstep noise on porch during early morning hours, humming while gardening, creating unnecessary noise. Each violation carried an $85 fine. Within 48 hours, Karen had racked up 680s in fabricated fines, weaponizing bureaucracy to wage financial warfare, hoping to crush their spirits until they left Pinewood Drive on their own. Ryan was on edge, constantly checking the driveway, jumping at every creak in the house. Sleeplessness and anxiety were eating him alive. Morgan, maybe we should just pay these fines and comply with her rules. Maybe if we keep quiet, she'll leave us alone. Ryan's voice cracked under the weight of frustration. Morgan turned to him, eyes calm but unwavering. Do you really want to live your life bowing down to a bully? I've led troops in real war zones, Ryan. I'm not afraid of a Karen with a clipboard. That night, while Ryan sat in restless silence, Morgan opened her laptop and created a new folder on her desktop: Operation Pinewood Peace. Inside, she began collecting evidence. Photos of Karen prowling with her phone out, each absurd violation notice, every petty comment Karen made while lurking near their property. Morgan installed a discreet camera pointed toward Karen's yard, capturing footage of Karen letting her dog defecate on their lawn without cleaning up, or blocking Morgan's car as she tried to leave for her morning run. Karen had no idea that the person she was provoking wasn't just a military wife, but a former commanding officer trained in tactical strategy and evidence gathering. As Karen escalated, she began visiting neighbors again, spreading whispers. You know, no one's actually confirmed she's really military. She's aggressive. I'm concerned for our safety. They're disturbing the peace. Haven't you noticed? Morgan simply smiled, letting the cameras and recordings capture every lie Karen told, every false rumor she tried to plant. That evening, as Ryan stared at yet another stack of violation notices, Morgan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You don't have to worry anymore, she said softly, her voice calm but resolute. Karen's little game is about to end. And in that moment, Pinewood Drive unknowingly became the stage for the next chapter in this battle. Karen still believed she was in control, but she had already stepped into Morgan's trap, a battle of patience, truth, and quiet strength. Karen's next phase wasn't loud, but it was relentless. Each morning, Ryan found a new violation taped to their door. Each evening, Karen's dog was allowed to run unleashed across their yard, scratching up the flower beds Morgan had carefully replanted after deployment. At night, Karen would stand on her porch, arms folded, eyes fixed on Morgan's windows like a sentry watching a prison yard. She was trying to break them. Slowly, methodically, Karen escalated her harassment to turn Pinewood Drive into a battlefield of petty tyranny. The notices piled up: unapproved vegetation height, exterior lighting violation, bulb brightness, alleged loud talking during phone calls on porch, excessive driveway water runoff during car wash. Each fine added up, pushing Ryan's anxiety to the edge. Morgan, this is insane, he whispered one night as they sat under the glow of the porch light. It's like we're prisoners in our own home. But Morgan was watching, recording, documenting. Every move Karen made became another entry in Operation Pinewood Peace. She collected time-stamped videos showing Karen's dog off leash, Karen's car parked illegally in front of hydrants, and Karen taking flash photos into their windows at night. Karen wasn't aware she was under constant surveillance by a trained officer who viewed each piece of evidence as ammunition in a larger war. The final straw came one morning when Ryan found a violation for improper display of flag. It was the American flag, flying from their porch, a flag Morgan had carried with her through 8 years of deployments. Ryan's voice shook as he handed the paper to Morgan. She's crossed the line. Morgan didn't respond immediately. She folded the notice carefully, placed it in the Operation Pinewood Peace folder, and picked up her phone. The next day, Morgan emailed the HOA board. I am formally requesting a review of all violations issued to my residents within the past 30 days, including a presentation of documented evidence for each alleged infraction. As a homeowner and community member, I expect fair and unbiased treatment, and I will be presenting my own documentation for the board's consideration. Karen wasn't ready for what came next. That evening, Karen was in her usual patrol mode when Morgan calmly walked across the street, phone in hand, camera recording. "Karen, I'd like to discuss these violation notices with you," Morgan said, her voice calm but firm. Karen's eyes darted toward the camera, realizing she was being filmed. "You can't record me without my permission," Karen snapped. "This is a public sidewalk," Morgan replied evenly, "and I'm documenting this conversation for the HOA review." Karen's composure cracked for a moment, but she quickly regained her false confidence. "I'm protecting this neighborhood from troublemakers like you." Morgan tilted her head, studying Karen with the calm of someone who had led soldiers under fire. "Are you protecting the neighborhood, or are you trying to control it?" she asked quietly. Karen's lips tightened. "You'll see what happens to people who think they can defy me." Morgan nodded. "We will see." The following week, Pinewood Drive's HOA board convened for a meeting that would be remembered for years. Neighbors gathered at the community center, curiosity drawing them to the event like spectators to a match they didn't want to miss. Karen arrived first, a rolling suitcase of evidence in tow. She smiled coldly at neighbors, handing out printed violations summaries like they were invitations to her personal victory parade. When Morgan entered, she carried only her laptop and a small folder labeled evidence. She greeted neighbors politely, earning nods and whispers of encouragement from those who had quietly suffered under Karen's reign for years. The meeting began with Karen's presentation, each word dripping with practiced authority. "For 12 years, I have upheld this community's standards, protecting property values and ensuring safety. However, certain residents have repeatedly violated these standards, disturbing the peace and setting a poor example." She gestured toward Morgan. "This resident has refused to comply with reasonable guidelines. I am requesting immediate enforcement of accumulated fines and a compliance plan to prevent further disruption." The board nodded politely as Karen continued, listing every violation, punctuating each one with dramatic pauses and referencing community guidelines she had memorized word for word. When she finished, she closed her binder with a sharp snap, looking around the room as if expecting applause. That was when Morgan stood. "Thank you, Karen, for your thorough presentation," Morgan began calmly, her posture relaxed but commanding. "Now, I'd like to share some additional information." She connected her laptop to the projector, and the first image appeared, a clear video of Karen's dog defecating in Morgan's yard, Karen walking away without cleaning up. Gasps rippled through the room. Next came photos of Karen's car parked illegally, of Karen's unapproved yard decorations, of Karen taking photos into their windows at night. Morgan's voice remained calm, factual, precise. "I have documented 27 instances of non-compliance by Karen, including trespassing, no less, and misuse of HOA authority." She displayed a chart comparing the number of violations issued to their households 18 and 30 days versus the entire rest of the neighborhood's 75 total. She showed timestamps proving Karen's noise complaints were false, and security footage showing Morgan was at work during alleged infractions. Neighbors murmured, heads turning toward Karen, who was growing pale under the harsh light of exposure. Morgan finished with a final statement. "We all deserve to live in a community where rules are enforced fairly, not weaponized by a single individual to control others. I am requesting the dismissal of all fabricated violations and a formal review of Karen's use of HOA authority." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of truth revealed. The silence after Morgan's presentation felt like it stretched for eternity. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing in the community center, the soft hum of the projector fan, the shifting of neighbors in their seats. Karen stood there, clutching her binder like a lifeline, eyes darting across the room as if searching for allies. But the nods and murmurs she was used to commanding were gone, replaced with sideways glances, furrowed brows and whispers she could no longer control. Morgan calmly disconnected her laptop and returned to her seat, her expression composed, her breathing steady. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. The head of the HOA board, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Thank you, Morgan, for providing clear, timestamped documentation. We appreciate the thoroughness of your report." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Collins raised his hand sharply. "Karen, you will have your chance to respond after the board deliberates." It was the first time Karen had been publicly silenced in her own domain. The board members retreated to the corner of the room, forming a tight circle, papers in hand, speaking in low voices. The neighbors sat quietly, exchanging looks, some glancing at Karen with pity, others with clear irritation. A child in the back row whispered, "Mummy, is she in trouble?" And the mother gently hushed him, her eyes on Karen. Karen's face was a study in unraveling arrogance. The tight smile she wore had cracked, her eyes flickering with panic, the pink in her cheeks drained away. After 15 minutes that felt like a lifetime, the board returned to the front of the room. Mr. Collins looked up, clearing his throat again. "We have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties." He began, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. "It is clear that the violation notices issued to Morgan and Ryan were unfounded and targeted, inconsistent with the enforcement patterns for the rest of the neighborhood." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Therefore, we are dismissing all violations and associated fines issued to Morgan and Ryan in the past 30 days. A murmur of approval rippled through the neighbors, some nodding, others exchanging relieved smiles. Karen's shoulders slumped, the binder in her hands dropping to her side. Mr. Collins continued, "Furthermore, we are issuing a formal censure to Karen for misuse of her position within the HOA and for harassment of residents under the guise of community enforcement." Karen's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "This censure will be recorded in the HOA's permanent records. Any future complaints submitted by Karen will require verification by at least 2 unrelated parties before they are processed." It was the death sentence for Karen's reign of intimidation. Finally, Mr. Collins looked directly at Karen. "We are also requesting that you refrain from direct contact with Morgan and Ryan moving forward, unless it is in the presence of a neutral HOA representative." A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. For the first time, the neighbors on Pinewood Drive felt free enough to show their support. Karen turned, her face pale, her eyes glassy, clutching her binder to her chest as she shuffled out of the community center, the door closing behind her with a soft thud that felt louder than any argument she'd ever made. Outside, the sun was setting over Pinewood Drive, casting long shadows across the street. Neighbors gathered in small groups, some hugging Morgan, others shaking Ryan's hand. "Thank you for standing up," Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor, said with tears in her eyes. "We've all been so scared of her for so long." Morgan simply smiled. "We all deserve to live in peace." The days following the meeting felt like the neighborhood had taken a deep breath for the first time in years. Children played on the sidewalks without the fear of being scolded for noise. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for fear of becoming targets now shared morning waves and friendly conversations. Karen's house, once the fortress of Pinewood Drive, became a dark, silent monument to her downfall. The blinds stayed closed, the surveillance patrol stopped, the dog no longer roamed freely, and Karen was nowhere to be seen on her porch. Ryan found himself standing on the porch one evening, breathing in the cool air, watching the sunset. Morgan came up beside him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "She's gone quiet," Ryan said. "She's regrouping?" Morgan replied calmly, but there was no fear in her voice. "But we're ready now." For the first time since moving in, Ryan felt like the house was truly theirs, a home, not a battlefield. The American flag flew gently in the evening breeze, no longer a target but a quiet reminder of the freedom they had reclaimed, even in the smallest of neighborhoods. The next morning, Morgan started her run down Pinewood Drive, her shoes tapping rhythmically against the pavement, her breath steady, her eyes forward. Neighbors waved, some joining her for a few blocks, others cheering from their porches. Karen's curtains moved, but Morgan didn't bother to look. She didn't need to. The war was over, and she had won. But deep down, Ryan wondered, is this truly the end? Or is Karen plotting something else in the dark corners of that quiet house? And as Morgan returned from her run, wiping the sweat from her brow, she smiled knowingly. Let her try. The quiet on Pinewood Drive didn't last. 3 weeks after the HA meeting, a suspicious white sedan began appearing at odd hours outside Morgan and Ryan's house. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night, always parked in the same spot, just within sight of their front window. Morgan noticed first. Her eyes caught the reflection of the car's headlights in the glass as she laced up her shoes for her morning run. She said nothing, merely noting the license plate and the time. Ryan, sipping his coffee, didn't notice the tension in her shoulders as she tied her laces tighter than usual. Karen wasn't done. Ryan saw it too eventually. The The sedan would sit there with the engine running, lights on, before driving away slowly as if inspecting the house, inspecting them. Sometimes the window would roll down just enough to reveal a phone camera poking out, recording. The neighborhood began to notice as well. "She's back, Mrs. Henderson whispered one morning while watering her roses, nodding toward the white sedan. "She can't stand that you won." Morgan's reply was simple, calm. She never won. One afternoon, as Ryan stepped out to collect the mail, he saw Karen herself in the driver's seat. She wore large sunglasses and a hat pulled low, but there was no mistaking the tight line of her lips, the clenched jaw, the cold glare that flickered from the car before she sped away. Karen was watching, but Morgan was ready. That night, Morgan laid out folders on the kitchen table, methodically arranging evidence timestamps, license plate photos, and neighbors' statements about the harassment. She worked with the calm, patient efficiency of a strategist preparing for a final operation. "Ryan," she said, her voice low but steady, "tomorrow we end this." The following morning, Morgan waited, watching from the living room window. Right on schedule, the white sedan pulled up, parking across the street under the same lamppost. Morgan stepped out, holding her phone, recording as she walked calmly toward the car. Karen rolled down the window, her face pale but defiant. "What are you doing?" she snapped. Morgan didn't stop walking until she stood beside the window, holding her phone steady. "I'm documenting your harassment, Karen, just like you documented us." Karen's eyes darted around the street, seeking an audience, but none came. Neighbors were at their windows, phones in hand, silent witnesses to the confrontation. "You think you're untouchable," Karen hissed, "just because you wear that uniform." Morgan's eyes narrowed, but her voice was calm. "No, Karen, I think I'm accountable for my actions. Something you should learn." Karen slammed her hand against the steering wheel, frustration breaking through the composure she worked so hard to maintain. "I built this neighborhood. I made the rules. I kept everyone safe from people like you." Morgan tilted her head slightly. "People like me? Or people you can't control?" Karen's jaw clenched, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. "You're a danger. Your kind always is." Morgan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Karen, you called the police on a decorated officer. You filed false reports. You stalked and harassed families. And now you're here, sitting outside my home, watching me. Who's the real danger here?" Karen's eyes flickered, a crack in the armor. Morgan lifted her phone higher. "Say it, Karen. On camera. Tell the whole neighborhood why you're here." For a long moment, Karen said nothing. Then she rolled up the window and drove off, tires squealing as she left Pinewood Drive. But Morgan wasn't done. That evening, she uploaded the video to the Pinewood Neighborhood Forum with a simple caption, "For transparency and for our safety." The video went viral within the neighborhood in hours, spreading to nearby communities in days. The footage showed Karen's harassment clearly, her words captured in high definition for everyone to see. Neighbors began speaking up, sharing their own stories of Karen's intimidation. Quiet voices who had once been afraid found the courage to stand, bolstered by the knowledge they were not alone. A retired veteran on the street posted, "Karen fined me for having a flagpole. Said it was a violation. Never again." A young couple wrote, "She told us we weren't welcome because we had a loud toddler. We felt trapped. We're done being afraid." An elderly woman shared, "She told me my wind chimes were illegal and threatened to fine me. I took them down. I'm putting them back up." The HOA held an emergency meeting. This time, the crowd was larger than ever, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, determined to reclaim their peace. Karen showed up, binder in hand, eyes flicking nervously around the room. She tried to speak, but every word fell flat under the weight of the evidence and the silent judgment of her neighbors. Mr. Collins stood at the front, clearing his throat. "Karen, due to the overwhelming evidence of harassment and abuse of authority, your role within the HOA is officially terminated. Your privileges within the HOA are revoked." Karen's mouth opened and closed, words failing her as her power was stripped away in the community she once ruled. Morgan stood quietly in the back, arms crossed, watching as Karen's empire of fear crumbled before her eyes. Outside, the neighborhood children played in the street. The American flag waved gently in the breeze. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now smiled and shared stories openly. Karen's house became silent, the curtains always closed, the once vigilant eyes of the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator hidden away, powerless. And as Morgan and Ryan sat on their porch that evening, sipping iced tea as the sun set, Ryan turned to his wife and said, We're finally home. Morgan smiled, her eyes on the peaceful street. Yes, and it's going to stay that way. When Karen left the HOA meeting, her face pale and her eyes hollow, Pinewood Drive seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. There were no more shadows lurking behind curtains, no more sneaky camera clicks, no more violation slips taped to doors at dawn. That afternoon, Morgan stood on the porch, a warm cup of tea in her hand, watching children laugh and chase each other across the street, free and unafraid. Neighbors gathered on front lawns, sharing baked bread and stories they had been too afraid to tell before. Smiles came easier, eye contact returned. Ryan stepped outside, draping a sweater around Morgan's shoulders as a cool breeze rustled the trees. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked quietly. Morgan smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the golden afternoon light. "Karen might still struggle, but her power is gone now. What's left is just noise." What Morgan didn't say out loud was that her vigilance never faded. Years in the military had taught her that peace was never simply given. It was earned and protected by those willing to stand firm when it mattered. The next morning, a moving truck arrived in front of Karen's house. No one knew exactly where she was going, only that she stood by her door, looking out at the street she once controlled. Each garbage can, each car parked on the curb, each neighbor's quiet routine. Morgan walked out, standing calmly, eyes steady. Karen caught her gaze for a brief moment, as if she wanted to say something, but turned away. She climbed into the truck, the door slammed shut, and the truck rolled down Pinewood Drive, leaving a fragile, quiet peace in its wake. Neighbors slowly gathered that morning, realizing they had reclaimed their community. The fear that once clung to them was gone, replaced by cautious optimism. George, the elderly neighbor, placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "You know, it's because of you and Morgan that this street finally feels like home again. We were silent for too long." Ryan smiled, looking over at Morgan with pride. "It wasn't just us," Ryan replied. "It's because we all decided to stop being silent." That evening, Morgan and Ryan sat by the small backyard pool, the warm lights reflecting off the gentle ripples of the water. Morgan leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder, breathing deeply as she stared up at the clear night sky. "You know," Morgan said softly, "if we hadn't stood up, it would have happened to someone else. Karen isn't the only person in the world who abuses power. But when one person stands up, it breaks the silence." Ryan tightened his grip on her hand, nodding. "And you were the one who broke it." Morgan chuckled, tilting her head to look at him. "No, we did it together." Laughter from the neighbor's yard drifted over the fence, blending with the whisper of the breeze and the soft splash of water against the pool's edge. It became a song of peace, marking the start of a new chapter on Pinewood Drive. Karen was gone, but she left behind a lesson: silence is not the only option, and when a community stands together, the tyranny of one cannot silence the voices of many. Morgan closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her, knowing that for the first time in a long while, they were truly home. This story isn't just about a military woman standing up to a controlling HOA Karen. It's a reminder to anyone who has ever felt threatened, bullied, or intimidated by people who think they hold unchecked power. When you stand up for yourself, you're not just reclaiming your freedom, you're inspiring others around you to step out of fear. It was courage, unity, and the refusal to back down that allowed the Pinewood Drive community to reclaim its peace. If you're dealing with a Karen in your life, remember you are not alone. There are always people willing to stand with you if you take the first step to speak out. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you found this story meaningful, share it so others can find hope and strength through it as well. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss real, life stories that empower you to live boldly and protect your peace. Together, we can build communities that honor truth, justice, and kindness while standing strong against intimidation. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for choosing to be part of the change. If you've made it this far, it means you're someone who cares about fairness and standing up for what's right. So, don't forget to hit that like button right now. It might seem small, but your like helps push this story out to more people who need to hear it, especially those dealing with their own Karens in life. Drop a comment below and let us know if you've ever faced something similar, or just share your thoughts about today's story. Your words might give strength to someone else watching who needs that encouragement to stand their ground. And if this is your first time here, I'd love for you to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week I share real, life stories and lessons to help you live boldly, protect your peace, and stay free from people who try to control your life. Finally, if you think this story could help someone you care about, share this video with a friend on Facebook or in your group chat. You never know. Your one share could change someone's day or even their life. Thanks for watching until the end. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next story.